Hello, cruel world. Today I'm going to talk about a horrific and really tragic case, which is the death of a 16-month-old toddler called Star Hobson. So in this video, I'm going to tell you the background of the case and the abuse that she suffered and which led to her death. And I'm going to answer the question, what will be the treatment of her mother, Frankie Smith, in prison? And I'm also going to try and tackle the very sticky and complicated issue of if it was the social services fault, and if so, to what degree. So why am I talking about this now? This actually was a court case that was heard in Bradford in December of last year, 2021. But the reason it's relevant now is because the mother of Star Hobson, who's a 20-year-old now called Frankie Smith, has had her sentence appealed. So she's already been charged with allowing the death of Star Hobson by her partner, Savannah Brockhill. And that all occurred, the death occurred in September 2020, and the judge described it as utterly catastrophic. But what's happened today, when I recorded this video, is her sentence has been increased. The mother's sentence has been increased for allowing this death from 8 years to 12 years. So Brockhill, who's the perpetrator, is a bouncer and a security guard, and she's already been charged with causing the death, and she's got a life sentence with a minimum term of 25 years. Now, if you watch my videos regularly, you'll probably know what that means, but very briefly, in case you don't, and shame on you for not watching them, a life sentence isn't life behind bars. A life sentence is the minimum amount, tariff, plus life under supervision after you're released, supervision by probation services. So in Brockhill's case, her tariff is 25 years. So after 25 years, she has to prove that she's no longer a danger to society to a parole board. But anyway, getting back to this case, it was heard at the Court of Appeal because the court thought that her initial judgment, this is the mother I'm talking about, Frankie Smith, of 8 years was too lenient for allowing the death of this toddler, and it was increased today to 12 years. And the reason it was 8 years in the first place was because that judge gave the loss of her daughter as mitigating, so as a mitigating circumstance. So mitigation circumstances is when you have an element of your case which should give you some leniency. So it's not quite enough to give you a defense, so it doesn't mean your guilt is reduced, but it just means you get leniency in terms of your punishment. I'm very familiar with mitigating circumstances because I'm an expert forensic psychiatrist, an expert witness, and I give evidence in criminal cases, and frequently lawyers try and suggest that somebody's mental illness should be a mitigating circumstance in this case. So this is a channel that dissects mental health and true crime, so I think it's only important to look at Frankie Smith's mental state. Very little has been revealed about her. This is the mother of Star Hobson, but we do know that a psychologist has assessed her recently for her trial and placed her within the bottom 2% of the intelligence range. So she doesn't quite have a learning disability, but she's very near the cusp. So for example, she was only 18 years old when she gave birth to Star, and at the age of 16, she was still playing with dolls. And this psychologist said that she was abnormally compliant. So I just want to be crystal clear, nobody, including myself, is excusing what she did. Nobody's saying that it wasn't cruel, it wasn't illegal, she's still going to jail, prison. But the argument is that she's easily influenced because she's got a very low intelligence, very low IQ, so she's unable to understand social norms, unable to resist the compliance of being pressurized to do something, however bad that thing is, by another person, which is the perpetrator, Brockhill. So I'm just trying to explain the science, the medico-legal terms behind it all. I'm not passing any judgment personally. Okay, so what kind of form, what happened? What did they actually do? I think is one of the most important questions. I'm going to give you a bit of a trigger warning this because it is really horrible. So both Frankie Smith and Savannah Brockhill were seen posting videos where they were intentionally taunting this young toddler, Star Hobson, and like hurting her, insulting her, calling her horrible words, calling her the C word, calling her it. There's some CCTV footage of the mother, Frankie, literally dragging her down the street with the rain things that you use for little toddlers. Now I have to say, right, I've got 2 kids myself, and as I mentioned, in my profession, I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist, so I assess people that have done horrific things, absolutely unspeakable things, killing family members, repeated sexual assaults, and I have to say, it really resonates with me, or affects me personally deeply, because I've got 2 kids, and just knowing how fragile and vulnerable they are, it blows my mind that people can have this level of cruelty. So in terms of what they did, the injuries at post-mortem showed that Star Hobson had 2 separate brain injuries. She had lots of old injuries on her abdomen, which suggested that she was being punched and kicked and stomped on. She had rib fractured, she had a fractured leg, fractured skull. So just a catalogue of brutal, horrible, prolonged abuse. I can't think of adjectives to describe how horrific that is. Moving on to another part of the case that I'd like to talk about is that apparently Smith's family, so the mother's family, many times reported to social services about all this bruising and these injuries, but the pair managed to convince social services that they were malicious complaints, and that the family weren't happy about their relationship, including their sexualities, and that they kind of explained away all these injuries by saying that they were accidental. Okay, right, so let's dissect some of the questions I talked about. What is Frankie Smith's treatment going to be like in prison? So as a forensic psychiatrist, I've worked in various prisons, including actually a female prison. And many of you might know this, but there's a hierarchy within prisons. There's like a hierarchy of morality, for want of a better word. And at the bottom of the hierarchy in men's prisons are people who commit violence towards children, who sexual predators are probably right at the very bottom, and violence towards women. In women's prisons, there's only really one major crime or type of offender which is disdained by everybody, and that is women that hurt children. So I think absolutely she's going to be a target. She's going to be extremely unpopular. They might have to put her in protective custody. If the case was less high profile, they would arguably even try and change Frankie Smith's identity to protect her. But I think that because it's so high profile, I don't think that's going to work. I think prisoners are going to know who she is, especially in the female prison estate, because it's so much smaller than the male prison estate. Something like 18 times the number of men in prison right now in the UK than women. So the reason I'm mentioning all this is it's going to be very, very hard, if not impossible, to hide her identity. Now, of course, a lot of you might be thinking that, you know, she deserves any kind of violence or punishment she gets. I'm a doctor, I don't want to make any comment on that. But I would say that the prison, regardless of what anybody thinks, has a responsibility to keep her safe. And that could be putting her in segregation, putting her in a vulnerable prisons wing, for example. Although often the prison guards put out their own form of punishment and justice, so they often tell prisoners who an individual is or what they've done, just so that they get some street justice, should we put it that way, from the rest of the prisoners. Okay, another really big point, I think, is this question: was it social services' fault? I think it's easy to blame services, and that happens a lot when you get these kind of cases. You probably all remember the case of Baby P, and that was certainly one massive thing that came out of that. I think it's difficult. I think the problem is that social services want to do their best to not break families up. And if somebody's very convincing and they say that there's reasons, you know, their relationship, sexuality, that people might be making malicious complaints, it's really easy for the actual real injuries to get lost. Having said that, this happened repeatedly, right? So I think it's hard to excuse that after 1 or 2 complaints. From what I've read, I think it's over 5 complaints. There's got to be a point where you've got to start taking it seriously and at least do physical investigations, right? And, you know, 1 injury is an injury, 2 injuries is maybe unlucky, but a whole pattern is hard, I think, to excuse or to turn a blind eye. So reluctantly, I don't like throwing professional services under the bus. I work for the NHS myself. Reluctantly, I find it hard to excuse, I find it hard to say that social services did a good job here. Having said all of that, I think that we shouldn't, as a society, move away from blaming the perpetrators. This is the fault of the evil people at the core of this, who are the main perpetrator, Savannah Brock-Hill, and to a degree, arguably to a lesser degree, although she allowed it to happen, Frankie Smith, who I've been talking about. Okay, so those are my thoughts on this whole situation. This is just a short video that I've knocked together today. I implore you to watch my longer videos. I tend to make them a bit more jovial, a lot more jokes. Obviously, it's distasteful to do that in this particular case, but they're more scripted, they're funnier, the longer, the sexier. For example, you should check out my video on the psychology behind domestic violence, psychology behind stalking, psychology behind pathological liars. If you like true crime news incidents like this one, then you might want to check out my recent video on Chanz Maximen, who's a man who's 19 who randomly stabbed but didn't kill a random doctor actually going into his house. And also, if you want something a bit more lighthearted but still related to the true crime real story genre, go check out my video on John Wayne Bobbitt. Both of those links will be in the description boxes below. Last thing I wanted to say is I genuinely really would like to hear all of your comments and views on this case, what you think about what happened, what you think about the people involved, also what you think about how they'll be treated in prison, what you think about the social services culpability. I want to hear it all. Let me know in the comment section below. That's it for me. I've been rabbiting on long enough. Go buy my book. It only came out last week. It's called In Two Minds. It's dope. Have a blessed day. Stay euthymic. And whatever happens, do not forget, I love you.